This is Morten from Inkish. I can't remember how many weeks ago, but I had the pleasure of talking to Nathan from NABCO Research, right?
Alliance Insights, we call ourselves now.
Okay, everything in America apparently changed names these days. Even the place we're at, I can't even remember where we are right now. So, Nathan, good to see you.
Good to see you.
I really liked talking to you a couple of weeks ago. I think the work you do and the insights of the research that you do for the industry is tremendously important. So thank you for that.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It must be fun also digging into all these details, right? Trying to understand the ups and downs.
It is. It really is. And what's interesting is if I do my job well, the research really tells the story and it indicates, what it is that's happening and what's going on under the surface. And then when you layer on top of that the opportunities that we have to talk with print service providers and get the color on the ground around the data, you start to get a really good picture of what's happening. So, we talked about AI, and we did our second study on AI, and the data really tells the story of the progression. So yeah, it is fun.
Do you think, and I'm not trying to have a leading question here, but do you think that sometimes when, let's say that you are asked to do a study on AI, for example, or on inkjet, or whatever one technology, do you think that sometimes when a research company that also have a media arm and have an exhibition arm and have all these different positions in the market, do you think that sometimes it can happen that you are also forcing a direction a little bit?
It's a good question, and I will say that we work very hard to avoid that. There's zero pressure from anywhere within the organization, from executives, to come to a conclusion that will positively impact an event, a conference, an expo. And we're not selling any products, right? So it's not like we're pushing inkjet.
You don't have an interest in it yourself, of course, right?
Right,
Yeah.
Exactly. So, and we take our mission of being an independent third party in the industry and informing people very, very seriously. So I together with the team, and the team is also very, our analysts, and Andy Paparazzi is our chief economist, and there's been times where someone has said, hey, can you kind of talk about it this way? He's like, no, because that's not what the data is saying.
The reason why I'm asking is also because sometimes when I see research, I even spoke to our colleague Pat McGrew yesterday that used to be with Keypoint Intelligence, where she said that in the past you got the data from the vendor, so it was a little bit easier. Right. Now you had to actually go and find it and make questionnaires. And that, of course, raises the question that we also spoke about online, is that the data quality is, tremendously important, right? Oh, yes. But I was also thinking that vendors, even though they don't put a pressure on you, the more we talk about inkjet, the more important everybody thinks it is. Mm-hmm. But it still accounts for a very, very little fraction of the market, right?
No, it's a great point, and that's exactly how we talk about it, in exactly that way, right? We talk about it a lot, to your point, because it's up and coming, because of the benefits it can have, because it enables personalization and short run. But we do publish data that shows, to your point, it is still a small portion, right? And analog, it's still inkjet alongside analog. And it will be for some time. And there's we've done research on how do you make a decision about what goes here or what goes here as a print service provider. So we talk about it a lot because we feel it's important for print service providers to be investing in it, understanding the benefits, seeing if it applies for them. But we are, like to your point, very transparent about, hey, it's still a small amount of, we want to be on the cutting edge and saying, here's where we think things are going, here's why we think you should be thinking about it, but we're clear about where it stands, to your point.
What about when you sit and talk to colleagues and have a good glass of wine and just enjoy life? Do you think sometimes that we on the media and on the analyst side and research side, we are so smart that we should run all the printing companies ourselves because we know exactly where it goes, right?
You know something, I like the question, and the reason I like the question is because virtually every time I speak, when I'm up there and I'm talking about making an investment, you should be looking at this, you should be looking at that, you should be focused on productivity. Almost all the time, and if it doesn't happen, I forget, but I say I don't want to seem tone deaf, that I'm an analyst standing up here spending your money and talking about how easy it is to invest in all these things. And I make that point because it's important to say that. I'm not in the trenches. I'm not on the press floor. I'm not looking at the spreadsheet of finances. But at the same time, what you and I do bring to the table is we're external to the forest, right? And sometimes when you're in the forest, you see the trees and not the forest. So we can be valuable in providing that external view, but maintaining that humility and understanding, hey, like I get there's lots of things going on here. So here's food for thought. That's how I talk about it. It's a thought experiment. Think about it, that type of thing.
Totally agree. And it's funny you say so, because I often think that, of course, you need also to point in a direction. And then sometimes people, I'm not an analyst, but sometimes people ask me, so what do you think? Should I buy this or should I buy that? I said, first and foremost, I'm not qualified to give you a really qualified answer to that. But think of this, if you look back today and you look back 10 years when you did the last huge investment, how much has been changing? COVID, energy crisis, depending on where you are. And there's nothing in the world that doesn't say that there should be as many changes forward going as well, which just makes it even more impossible to really make the really qualified guesses, right?
No, you're 100% right. And the answer that you give to people when they ask you about technology investments is exactly the answer that we give, right? I didn't go out and study Canon versus Ricoh versus this versus that. What we can provide them, I think, though, are the questions they should be asking these vendors.
That makes sense.
Right. So, for example, when I spoke yesterday, I talked about productivity and the significance of it. Is that you should be holding the vendors their feet to the fire and asking them, how is your product going to make me more productive? How is it going to help me reduce waste and reduce reliance on labor and all those kinds of things?
I actually heard, sorry to interrupt you, I actually heard when you spoke yesterday, but I was thinking that something I think our industry, and maybe both you and I as well, is missing, is the fact that we can talk about productivity, we can talk about how smart we are, how much we can use technology, but if we don't get more customers, if we don't get more value out of the customers, then everything doesn't really matter, right? And I'm just thinking that sometimes it could be great if we also came up with some ideas and say, research say that 7-color is the new black, right? Or whatever it could be, right? Just to support basically that the technology investments also goes in a direction that basically, not just from a productivity, but also from a sales perspective, see some trends, right?
It's a great point, and we spoke about that yesterday, and the way that I tried to frame it was, historically we talk about these things as, productivity improvements, to your point. I've always been about, how do I reduce money out? And
that was where you had the in, out.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's very much less about how does it increase my money in. But we're entering an era, we think, at Alliance Insights where we're starting to introduce that. So, for example, AI, you're going to analyze your customer data, and you're going to say, look, this customer is costing you money, so fire them. Or this customer, there's an opportunity to sell them this or sell them that. Or based on your equipment, your customer base, your geography, your staff, you can actually relatively easily get into this new adjacent segment and spin up services or offer things like web design or data services. So that's what we think 2026 is the year of that, where you're to your point, you're starting to see an increase in money in from productivity, from automation, from AI, and it's not just about saving dollars.
It's funny you say that, because one of the, I wouldn't say beatings, but I'm known for beating the industry, is that when we, if you look at it from a software perspective on let's say estimates, and a lot of printing companies today rely on full cost models, right? Where you actually, to my own point, is like, but the cost base has nothing to do with what you sell it for.
Sure.
And therefore, what you say AI is maybe interesting because it's disconnected from the cost base. And that's interesting when you're here at an event that is about accounting systems, right?
Yeah.
And MIS systems, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think to your point, there's a couple things that a print service provider has to be thinking about. Number one is the data quality, right? It's never been more important than AI, because if you feed poor data into AI, it's going to give you back poor conclusions and poor decision making, right? So it's critical that folks are working on that, and that's not an easy task, right? Because as you know, in the industry for years, folks have had haven't always had clean data going in, and the reps are not entering the right information and all that type of stuff. And that's a big job. But that alone, before you even introduce AI, if you have the proper data and you're making decision making off proper data, you already have moved yourself forward, right? True. When you layer on top of that AI to analyze that data, it becomes even more powerful. So that's a big ask of folks, but it is crucial and imperative. And folks, the software vendors are getting better and better at helping folks do that, but that's a critical part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Always.